Don't torture yourself, Gomez. That's my job.
Alright, so I made this video for anyone who plans to go to therapy, who is already in therapy, or who is just curious about how psychotherapy works. Also, I'm going to be using an emotion-focused therapy point of view because that's what I'm getting trained in. So some people might ask, does therapy even work? And it's like, yeah, it works. Now, it's important to actually point out that a good chunk of the outcome in therapy doesn't have that much to do with the intervention itself. What do I mean by that? Well, there are different schools of psychotherapy with different philosophies behind them, and so different therapists may know different techniques to help their clients process difficult experiences, which is partly what psychotherapy comes down to. But ultimately, these in and of themselves do not determine if therapy will be effective. So then, what does work? A lot of what matters for the success of therapy is what has to do with a client's life outside of therapy, such as their social life, their social support, and all the day-to-day resources and challenges. These external factors can account for anywhere from 40 to 87% of the effects of therapy, and by contrast, the second largest factor and one of the most extensively studied, which accounts for about 30% of the therapy's success, is the quality of the client-therapist relationship, also known as the working alliance. And the working alliance refers to developed feelings of trust, collaboration, understanding, acceptance, and support between the client and therapist. To try and make sense of these numbers, I believe you can think of therapy like gardening. We can't just grow our plants without decent soil quality, sunlight, and other environmental factors. And the working alliance is like a gardener. It helps put these resources to use and helps maintain the health of the plants. But even with a good gardener, if the plants are exposed to abuse from animals and hail and flooding when the gardener isn't around, you can't expect that much to come out of it. And so, yes, therapy helps. I'll actually say that therapy is necessary, but it can't help everyone at any time to the same degree. It requires commitment, time, and goddamn money! Who actually manages to attend therapy is a sensitive topic in and of itself. Research points out that people with lower socioeconomic status, lower education, and those who are older are less likely to utilize psychotherapy due to obvious financial and logistical barriers. People simply cannot afford the time or the costs associated with therapy, or they might feel general stigma and distrust in therapy. And there are ways to mitigate some of these problems, but much of psychotherapy remains unfortunately a luxury service. Now, also the length of therapy depends on the depth of the underlying emotional difficulties. If someone's been mistreated their whole life by their close ones, they will naturally need more time to process all that. Partly also because they will need more time to be able to trust and bond with the therapist. And this is furthermore tragic because the same people who arguably need therapy the most, people with serious adverse childhood experiences, they're the same people who grow up disadvantaged with likely lower education and socioeconomic status, and therefore will actually have less chances of utilizing psychotherapeutic services. But irregardless, the point is the process should take as much time as the client needs. I know about clients who showed almost immediate improvements and clients who only started to show some improvements a year and a half down the line. And we'll address a bit later what leads to this. But anyway, the point is that despite there being uniqueness in the way clients transform as a result of therapy, the process does tend to follow a similar roadmap for all clients, and everyone considering therapy should be aware of this. So now, What happens is that many of us start therapy either overwhelmed or with a vague bad feeling, which we refer to as global distress. And at the beginning, addressing and exploring this is important, but what's even more important is focusing on the bond between the client and therapist, on that 30% we mentioned at the beginning of this video. Because without a strong enough bond, the client simply cannot feel comfortable enough to properly address their underlying suffering. So at the beginning, and possibly for a while, you should expect to build that relationship with your therapist. And if you as a client feel like that doesn't really happen, and it even goes unaddressed, I would straight up call it a red flag. Next comes the stage of differentiation, and here we should briefly address the philosophy of emotions in EFT. So for the purpose of this video, our emotions can be put into two broad categories. We have primary emotions and we have secondary emotions. Primary emotions are, as the name suggests, the way we initially organize ourselves so that we can adapt to the environment. We might get angry and we want our boundaries to be respected, or we might get sad and we want to feel supported. As you could conclude from this, our emotions can be satisfied. Whenever there's an emotion, there's also a need and a call for action. Now, the problem is, a kid might get angry about something that was done to them at school, for example, and instead of getting supported by their caretaker,
It's okay, sweetie, don't worry, I'm gonna kill that son of a
they
bitch.
might face backlash.
Come on, stop exaggerating. Shut the hell up, I'll bash your mouth in if you don't shut up.
Why did you get into the argument?
And that primary emotion, the anger that rightly signaled that a kid was being mistreated, did not get satisfied. Now, does it go away, the anger? No, it doesn't. And on top of that, now the child doesn't even know what to do with it. Did they deserve the way they were treated? Now, do they even risk going outside? Or will it happen again? Secondary emotions are used to cope not only with the vulnerable primary emotions, but also with the pain associated from being neglected or abused in the process. Anxiety, resentment, overwhelm, they're all there to mask what's really happening underneath. So as we've discussed so far, the first stages of therapy are about developing the working alliance between client and therapist, and also about differentiating between the different emotions that the client struggles with and understanding how they came about. Now, as therapy progresses, so does the emotional processing. We won't get too deep into the nitty-gritty, but just know there are many workflows in therapy for different types of emotional difficulties, for social anxiety, generalized anxiety, depression, trauma, and so on. But generally speaking, what happens is we first get to the bottom of whatever emotion we're dealing with. We understand and express the pain and the need associated with that emotion, and then we gradually move on to transform our difficult emotions into other ones that are more beneficial. That kind of makes it sound like you're changing yourself artificially, but in reality the emotional changes happen naturally and intuitively. The therapist is not there to, or shouldn't be there to tell you what to feel, but instead they're there to assist you with the way your emotions naturally can unfold. And overall, yeah, expect this transformation to hurt, but just know that it's not causing hurt, because the pain is already there but muted and buried under all the secondary emotions, what we talked about previously, and letting that pain out is part of the process. A principle in EFT is that you don't talk about the emotion or the pain, and instead you actually allow yourself to talk from the emotion, from the pain, because the way out of it, as Greenberg himself would say, is only through. Unfortunately, I realized that there isn't a great amount of information on YouTube about EFT or psychotherapy altogether, which is why I'm planning to try to fill that gap with what I believe to be important information about the process and other relevant topics. Why am I pronouncing it like that? EFT. Oh, it's because... Or maybe it's like ES. Something like that.
Wake up every day, I have some food and everything seems like it's going to be fine. Then all of a sudden shit